Yes, my name is Faith, and I'm really happy to be here with all of you. I will tell you just a little bit about my background, a couple of interesting things. I'm one of 9, grew up Irish Catholic, and my dad was the zoo director. So we lived on the zoo, and literally our house was on the zoo ground, so it was a zoo inside our home with 9 kids and outside. So we had, my dad would bring home baby leopards sometimes, or iguanas, boa constrictors. If there was a young animal that was sick, he'd bring that home. And after hours at the zoo, we could go wander around. We weren't supposed to go in with the animals, but sometimes we did. I accidentally let the otters loose one day. But I also found them. So then growing up, my mom was, and my husband was here also, he grew up on a dairy farm, so I had the exotic animals and he had the cows and the sheep and things like that. So, and we still have a couple sheep. After high school, I went to art school, and then after art school, I became a chef, which was edible art. It was pretty hard for young artists to make a living, but a lot easier if you can cook, and you get a lot more appreciation as well. So we started Rudy's Restaurant. I was the head chef at Rudy's Restaurant in Boulder, Colorado, and we were contemporaries with Mo Siegel and the people that started Celestial Seasonings Tea, the White Wave Tofu, Horizon Dairy. I did their wedding. A lot of those kind of hippie type businesses were there, and my husband and Bob Stoker started Rudy's Bakery as well. So we sold that way before it made any money, unfortunately, because now you can find it in the freezer in the grocery stores, even here. But I never stopped, even though I opened a restaurant, I never stopped making art. I'd do posters, and for the restaurant, I'd also just do art on my own, and I always had that deep love of art. When I was in art school, I wasn't sure what kinds of things, what I wanted my subject matter to be. And so if we had an assignment, we had to do a painting. I think, do I want to do a landscape? Do I want to do figure painting? Do I want to do abstract? And nobody said, how about, why don't you do a Buddha? And so, but that was, when I found Tonka painting, that was when I was like, this is what I want to do. So I studied, this is a traditional Tibetan Tonka here. And for me, they would take about 6 months to paint because it's pointillism is the shading. You have a very specific graph system. So I wrote a little book with some of the graphs because I couldn't find very many. So I thought, well, I'll make some for other people to use as well. So I wrote a little book about that, and then I gradually moved towards more contemporary works like this because I'm really concerned about animals and the environment, and so I do a fair amount of environmental work, and so that was featuring all different animals around the Buddha. And the other thing that happened is I was teaching high school by that time. So after we sold the restaurant, then I became an art teacher. And when I was teaching high school, I heard about a sculptor or a wood carver in Hawaii, Hiroki Morinoue. And I thought, oh, hi, Andrea. She's a carver and printers. And I'd heard about him for years, and at that time I was living in Colorado teaching, and I could never go to his classes at Anderson Ranch because they were in the summertime, and I had a kids camp. I love making art with kids and doing that, so I always was missing him. And then eventually, we had lived here for about 15 years while one of our daughters was growing up, and I taught at Hualalai Academy. But then from there, we eventually came back to Hawaii, and then I finally met Hiroki at Donkey Mill and began studying with him. I'm in an online forum class with him right now, and he challenged us to do a 6-inch woodblock using only 2 blocks and try to get a feeling of cross grain. So these are my 2 blocks. I got additional colors by just reprinting the same block. And so I thought I'm going to surprise him and do a tiny portrait of him. So Hiroki Morinoue is from the Donkey Mill, but he's also one of the people that helped to revive and bring back Mokuhanga, which is the Japanese technique for woodblocks. Typically you carve a different block for each color, and they're non-toxic. You just use watercolor inks or paints, sumi ink, and you use just a bed end. I brought some of my tools along. This is the bed end that you would rub with to transfer. Here's one of my knives. They're really sharp, and they cut the sheen of plywood is mostly what we use. Sumi ink, I get a little bit thicker sumi ink to use with wood blocks. And this is a typical Japanese brush. So, and I have multiples of those things to show you. So I started studying with Hiroki, I think in 2014, and then I still check in with him. I'm still in the online forum, still learning a lot. I also had the opportunity to go to Japan and be in a residency for 6 weeks, an advanced residency at the base of Mount Fuji in Lake Kawaguchiko. And that was a wonderful experience. It was just constant carving and being with other people, having great teachers come in, but it was November and it was freezing cold. And I would go to bed with my clothes on at night, my hood all pulled up, and I could see my breath in the morning sometimes. It was 32 degrees one morning, but it was an amazing experience. So then I've been doing woodblocks. That became my passion, because with the Tonka painting, you can still study Tonka painting, and a lot of people are doing that, including in more contemporary ways. Woodblocks were one of the 5 techniques of Tonkas. The first was the scroll paintings, and the second is the sewed ones, the applique, where they're embroidered. The third was ones that are all gold background, which are very difficult to paint because of the reflection. And the fourth was all black Tonkas, not Tonkas. And then the last was woodblocks. But with the Chinese invasion of Tibet, all the monasteries that did the woodblock carving were wiped out except for one, which was Derge Parkang in East Tibet. And that's where, this is actually a woodblock mounted in a frame. It's very old. You can see the crack in the center. And it's about 54 little taras, so tiny. I can't carve that small. I can carve pretty small, but not that small. And so that was from there, but that's an old one. There's almost nobody doing them now. I'm one of the few people in the world that's carving woodblocks. And it's funny because they also faded out in Japan at the onset of ukiyo-e. Before that, it was common to see the Buddhas, and then they'd be hand-painted from the back. That's the way the Tibetan people did them as well. They carve the key block and hand-paint from the back. And I do it that way as well. I'll often do, like with Reverend Chico here, I hand-carved the background and have Reverend Chico and Amy in the center. They're waiting to greet everybody who comes here with their kindness and love. And little Michi is standing down beside them. And I've got a local rooster. I referenced the 2 cranes that are dancing in front, that sculpture, the 100-year-old temple. And this kanon is the kanon that's in the Zen meditation area. And Reverend Chico told me that it was a special kanon that was done specifically for Hawaii. So I thought that was important to include. And then I put a dragon in the sky, because dragons are great guardians to protect all of us. So I carved the woodblock. And you have to carve everything in reverse in order to get it to print correctly. And at first I had forgotten to flip Reverend Chico and Amy. And then Reverend Chico told me, oh, but the hand will be the wrong hand in front if you printed that one. I said, oh, right, I forgot to flip that one. So she caught that. And it took me, I was actually in a workshop with Hiroki on Oahu, so I had 9 days to pretty much carve. And I didn't quite finish it, but I finished most of it. I still had to add the rooster and a few other things. But it probably took me about 40 to 60 hours to carve. And then they take me another 4 to 6 hours to paint individually. And so even though they're multiples, each one is just a little bit different, whether it's different coloring in the clouds or little things, I'll make them a little bit unique. I also carve a lot of, for Mokuhanga, they're quite large blocks. And this is one Buddha that I had done early on. And typically the Japanese just carve about 11 by 14. They're almost all that size. And I was working with Hiroki one day and he said, Faith, you need to carve bigger. That's what everybody wants, it's bigger. And so I did. And then years later, I was at a workshop with him and he said, I never carve bigger than 11 by 14. If I want a bigger artwork, I just put them together. I piece them together and I was like, what? But that one was also featured in Lion's Roar magazine. So I've been in some publications like that. And let's see, I'll just give you a couple of examples. This is a little Aloha medicine Buddha. I call him because he has the hibiscus flowers behind. And Leonie, I'm going to have you whisper something. This is the cube block, so that's the Buddha. And then this is his halo, the orange halo. Or that's actually called the body nimbus, and the green is the halo. And then the blue for the hibiscus flowers and his body. Because medicine Buddha is usually blue. He's considered the healing Buddha. So that's when you do multiple blocks. That one, I still put a little bit of hand painting on his robes and in his belt kind of thing. I brought along a lot of different, well, let me see, I'll check my notes to see if there's something that I wanted to tell you. I told you about Hiroki and working at Donkey Mill and the 5 kinds of woodblocks, Darian Harkun, and the history, brief history. I think we've got it mostly covered that I wanted to talk about today. I would show you, I showed you the one book, I did one called Drawing Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It's a how-to on drawing Buddhas. And then this one I brought along is just a kind of a novel or story. It's called Rudy and the Green Apple, and Rudy was my first teacher. But that was also a tanka that was done with pointillism, so that took me about 6 months to paint that one. And there's my husband off to the side as a young man. And this one is called Karma and Faith. I love the title. But my friend is Karma Punsak, and he's a Tibetan refugee living in Australia. And I love, love, love his work. And when I saw this one that's on the cover, that painting changed my life. Because up until that point, I was doing just the traditional way, and I thought that you weren't supposed to break with tradition. And then at CU in Boulder, they had a show called Waves on the Turquoise Lake that showed Tibetans doing contemporary paintings of Buddhas. And then I thought, okay, well, if they're doing that, then I feel like that gives me permission to do it too. And I began painting more freely. It didn't take me so long to make. And when using acrylics and canvas, it took me about 3 or 4 years to get up my nerve, but I noticed that Karl Punsak, who's a world-renowned painter, was, he did Facebook, and he seemed to talk to people a little bit. So I wrote him one day and said, your painting changed my life. When I saw it, I just stopped and stared. I went back and visited it probably 15 times in the show. And I would just sit with it, and I was so inspired. And I've done that, when other people have felt moved by something, I've written other artists, never heard back from anyone. But right away, he said, faith law. Oh, what are you doing? And faith law is an endearing term, like we might say, Shirley dear or something. So faith law is like that. In Hindi, it would be G. So it would be Faith G or Shirley D or something. But so we became friends. And he said he was coming over to do a show in Miami. And I said, well, if you're going to be in the mainland, would you want to come to Colorado? My husband and I run a retreat in the mountains called Shoshone Yoga Retreat. And he said, well, you come and meet me first in Miami and we'll see. So we did. And we had a lovely time with him, saw his beautiful work, became friends, and then we've stayed friends ever since. And he comes over in the summertime and we do workshops together in Colorado. So we'll teach a weekend of how to paint Buddhas in a contemporary way. I brought a lot of things to show you in terms of blocks and some of my other work. I did want to, this is the one I've been working on the last week or so, thinking about Maui. And so I put a phoenix above the island rising up from the ashes. So I donated it to 808 Arts, which is a fundraiser for Maui. And then I also am trying to distribute myself. And we're going to do what we can to help our neighbors. This one has an ocean or waves behind the block. And I also really like ulu and the breadfruit and the quilting patterns. So I did 2 different ones to think about that, and not focusing, we all are aware of the heartache, and so sad, but that hopeful for the future, and the rising up, and the regrowth and renewal. Right, then I'm really more of a show and tell than give a long lecture, but I did make spanakopita's too to bribe people to come to them. And I'd love to show you some more of my work if you'd like to come up and see it. This one, I'll just show a couple. This one is a green tara that I did while I was in Japan, and for the background I put snow monkeys and Mount Fuji. Almost all of my woodblocks will have a reference to either Hawaii or Colorado, because I've lived mostly in those 2 places, but since I was in Japan, at the base of Mount Fuji. This is just a little dancing Ganesh. Ganesh is everywhere in India, and he doesn't have to be up in a prominent place. He can be in schoolyards, he can be on trucks, but I'm a big fan. And he rides his mouse. This time he's dancing, riding his mouse. The symbolism of the mouse is that they can get into every small corner, so available to help in all different areas. Durga with a mountain lion to reference Colorado, because Durga usually has a mountain. She's a protector goddess. Here's a Tara with a white crane, so the crane represents long life. And this Buddha is set in more of a Colorado. There's some mountains in the background. I put a peacock in and a stag. I do a lot of medicine Buddhas, so the blue in color, the healing Buddha. I think that's good. Thank you so much. We do have cookies and tea, and I'll turn it back over to Reverend Chico, who